Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, and this is a special edition. This is the quarterly round table where I am joined by the editor of Behind the Steel Curtain, Jeff Hartman, and the senior editor of the Steelers Wire, Neal Coolong. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Doing good.
Doing very well.
Okay, just to do almost like the whole, I guess, the pardon interruption thing, they usually give you like a minute or something if you win at the end. I'll just give you guys a minute each here at the beginning just to give a quick shout out. Neal, if you want to go first, to familiarize the listeners with your voice.
I guess I'm on the spot. I'm Neal Coolong, the senior editor of NFL Sites with USA Today Sports Media Group. I'm the founder of Steelers Wire. And I guess for that, we're expanding our network. That's sort of the news that we have that we're working pretty hard on establishing throughout social media and the internet. So check out any Wire site. I'm sure you'll like what you see.
And Jeff, likewise, there's your quick 30 seconds of fame or whatever.
Yeah, Neal gets a minute, I get 30 seconds. That's very common.
Neal only took 30 seconds, so.
Okay, my name is Jeff Hartman from BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. I'm the editor-in-chief of that website, former minion for Neal Coolong when he was with BTSC. It's good to be back on the show.
Man, a minion. I need some minions. I think I could classify Eric, who works with me, as I gave him a title because he's been with me for a while and he's always correcting my stuff. So I made him an associate editor, but maybe he could be like, he had joked around at one point that he said he was assistant to the supreme ruler. So I said, no, that's supreme leader. I don't know. I like Supreme Leader better. It just has a better ring to it. But speaking of leaders, Pittsburgh Steelers 3-1. The last time we got together was before the season kicked off. We tried to, at best, predict the first four games. I think we pretty much nailed the way things were going. I think the Redskins game probably went better than any of us could have imagined. The Bengals game was in our favor. We thought it'd be tight. The Eagles game was a complete disaster that nobody saw coming. In fact, Neal, I think me and you said that I think Fletcher Cox was the only guy that you said that the Eagles had, and he had a good game. And then, of course, Kansas City Chiefs, we successfully predicted the return of the juice running loose. So, gentlemen, I have to ask first off, what is your biggest surprise thus far 4 games into the season? Jeff, I'll let you kick off here.
I predicted 3-1. I didn't see them losing to the Philadelphia Eagles, as most people would say prior to the season. I think I would have thought they would have lost maybe to the Bengals, maybe even the Redskins in week 1. That wouldn't have been out of the realm of possibility for me. But the most surprising thing is the Steelers offense. If people talk a lot about, how dynamic they are and the goal of 30 points per game, I think when I look at this first quarter, they put up 3 points against the Eagles. And despite that 3, they are still averaging 27 points per game. That is pretty astonishing, in my opinion. It just shows how good this offense is, how good they still can be with Le'Veon Bell getting back into the fold. And so for me, offensively, that's what I would point to. It's still surprising that they put up 3 points in week 3 and are still averaging close to that 30-point mark. It's impressive, to say the least.
For me, I think where we are, the Philadelphia game really throws everything off. I don't think that they're 31 points inferior to the Philadelphia Eagles, the same way I don't feel that they're 29 points better than the Chiefs. That kind of evens things out. So I want to look at this more in a 3-game stretch almost rather than a 4. But the one common denominator through 4 games, largely, I guess 3.5, maybe you could say, lack of pressure. It's not so much that they're not getting to the quarterback, which they obviously aren't, but they're not even really trying to. Their scheme is far less aggressive than it was, certainly in the first 3 games. They dialed it up a little bit more against Kansas City. I think they felt they had more of an advantage with that. something they probably should have done against Philadelphia in retrospect, and that's probably why we saw a defense get beat as badly as it did. That, along with the amount of in-game replacements they had to go through in that game, that can explain some of it. But overall, the lack of production from the outside linebackers to me is a little bit surprising. I didn't expect that group to be, a real high-level bunch this season. But when you're looking at a significant loss in terms of Bud Dupree not being on the field, something's really wrong. They're really not getting much at all out of Jarvis Jones, out of Arthur Moats, out of James Harrison, certainly not out of Anthony Chickillo. And they're going to continue to have a problem with that as the rest of the season goes on. Basically, if Tuitt and Hayward cannot push the pocket and get pressure, they're going to be in significant trouble. And for a team that's coming off a season with 48 sacks, for them to be where they are right now is kind of surprising to me.
You think maybe that some of that might be just sitting back in coverage, especially it seemed that they were so afraid of getting beat by the big play. And I think the Philadelphia Eagles game is probably the biggest showing of that I could think of. It almost seemed like they were getting no pressure whatsoever, and no one was giving the Eagles offensive line any credit heading into that game as well. I don't know if it's necessarily the outside linebackers or not. I'm actually going to come back to that. Give me 1 second, because my biggest surprise, and I went with an individual, believe it or not, it's been B.J. Finney, who seemingly came out of nowhere. You had Cody Wallace, who was the backup guard and backup center, who's been hurt since the preseason, and he started in Marquise Pouncey's place all of last year. And you have this guy that got a raise on the practice squad last year in order to keep him there. And, the whole thing there seemed bizarre, and I've been mentioning this multiple times on all the platforms I'm on and social media and whatnot. I'm just very shocked at – I know it's a game or a game and a half, but I think he's been very well composed, and it's another one of these undrafted players, and it's all these undrafted players that have really taken me by surprise in the first quarter here. In particular, Finney, I probably would have said Eli Rogers as well if he wouldn't have gotten hurt. So that kind of jumps into my disappointment, and the biggest disappointment, which I'll have you guys chip in too, is that Philadelphia game. But they were still in it at halftime. And that's kind of where the disappointment is that, what was it? Philadelphia put up, 21 points in the third quarter, and they just got smoked. And they just looked really shell-shocked, and they couldn't create any pressure. And I don't know, maybe is it Keith Butler just didn't want to put certain things on tape, or are they just very one-dimensional as a defense, whereas the offense, they could pretty much do whatever they want. I think they can move their chess pieces however they please on offense. I'd say, Neal, why don't you continue, and then we'll go to Jeff on that. Your biggest disappointment so far this first quarter?
The biggest disappointment overall, I think for me, there is something to be said about a lack of schematic desire really to get after the quarterback. So I'm not going to say that, but overall, I think there's something to be said about the offensive line. I don't think it played a particularly outstanding game against Cincinnati. I think it got destroyed against Philadelphia. It rebounded well against Kansas City, and it was pretty good against Washington. The inconsistency of that group before the rash of injuries hit it, and it's going to be a factor now moving forward. But prior to that, I didn't see a great sense of rhythm between the whole unit. I didn't see a real high level of play all the time. Like I'm kind of led to expect that. I mean, 4 of the 5 of them are on contract extensions right now. They're veterans. The one who didn't played last season, played fairly well. Al Villanueva, I don't think he looks to me like the same player as he did last season. I thought they'd be better. I thought they'd be a little bit more capable of controlling even decent defensive lines this season. I don't think we've seen that to this point. And now I thought Finney has played well. I'm not going to take anything away from him, but you're going into a game in which it's possible, if not probable at this point, Chris Hubbard is going to start at right tackle against the Jets. You're not going to get a good game from your offensive line. So you almost can, before the game, chalk it up to a defeat in the trenches just in that phase of the game. And it's going to continue the same narrative. It almost just seems like the offensive line has stepped back from where they were over the past few seasons. I thought they'd be a lot better than what I've seen so far.
Yeah, just to jump in real quick. Jeff. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't get to complete the Finney statement. It just came around full circle to me. The reason it surprised me is just how bad. I mean, we see Pro Football Focus grading, but David DeCastro and Marcus Gilbert, and DeCastro being a Pro Bowler last year, Finney actually being graded higher in 2 games than any of the other offensive linemen that we have. That kind of took me by surprise the most. And that's because of the bad play. I mean, DeCastro and Gilbert both had a very miserable game on that right side of the line in Philadelphia. So, Jeff, your biggest disappointment?
Yeah, I think it would be relatively obvious to say, the Philadelphia game or the pass rush, like Neal mentioned earlier. For me, it's just the lack of consistency, and that's not just with the defense. That's not just with, it can be everything from, look at this upcoming game. This is a game that people would say is a trap game, and under Mike Tomlin, there's a case for that. As the New York Jets come into town in Week 5, but I think that just the team needs to be more consistent offensively. You look at the Cincinnati game and the Washington game; they came out very slow starts. They were aided by a crazy start to the Kansas City game, scoring 22 points in the first quarter. I just want to see more consistency in a play calling aspect on defense, especially like Neal talked about, the pressure on the quarterback. Consistency is the key. Winning these games, like the one that's coming up, that's going to be really, really important for their success down the stretch. So I think that the lack of consistency in the first quarter definitely was a little disturbing for me. But that's also, I guess, in some way expected, considering it's the first 4 games of the season. Still a lot of injuries, a lot of feeling out in terms of player and position. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, you know what? That's a very valid point. And I guess that brings me to another question I hadn't thought of prior to this, kind of going off the format, is how you guys feel about Mike Tomlin just basically being aggressive. I will say one thing, and it has surprised me. It surprised me in the Redskins game, and it surprised me on Sunday, is that finally Tomlin is deferring on coin tosses. It was almost all the time last year, maybe the last few seasons, where if they won the coin toss, they wanted the ball, they wanted to get that offense out there, and when they would stall, like you said, Jeff, then all of a sudden they're 3 and out, and they're giving the other team the ball, and then they get it at halftime or after halftime as well. And that always just, to me, if they were already in a hole, like what happened with Philadelphia, and Philadelphia gets the ball first in that second half, it's very deflating. They were already down 10 points or so, and 2 scores, and then all of a sudden 3 scores. So that's the one thing to me. In one aspect, it seems like Tomlin has kind of gotten a little conservative in that regard, and then on the other, he's going for it on 4th down. He's going for 2 points. How do you guys feel about that? For me, the best way I've heard it explained is Mike Tomlin said, well, I've got Ben Roethlisberger. And I kind of tend to agree with him, but at some point you got to wonder if it doesn't come around and bite you in the behind, because when it works, it's awesome. When it doesn't, it's not going to be good.
I think personally, it's basically you're kind of rolling the dice. I mean, if you decide to defer to the second half, you're hoping your defense can get a stop, and then your offense can go on the field and make a play. And the Pittsburgh defense has been inconsistent. It's obviously been one where sometimes they can force that 3 and out. Sometimes it's a long drive that ends in a field goal. Nonetheless, I've always liked to put the defense on the field first. I've always liked to have the ball first in the second half. That's just me personally. Everyone has differing opinions. The one thing that surprised me, and you mentioned it, is the 2-point conversion. They've only gone for 1. I mean, this is a team that leading into this season, Mike Tomlin, Ben Roethlisberger, Todd Haley, they all said that they would be okay going for the 2-point conversion on every single touchdown. They scored a lot of them, and they've only gone for 1. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that last game against Kansas City was the first 2-point conversion try of the 2016 season. So maybe Tomlin is playing the number game a little bit. There's always been the fabled sheet, the cheat sheet that coaches look at to see if they want to go for 2 or if they want to just kick the extra point. Maybe it's that he trusts Chris Boswell more this year. It's definitely interesting. Maybe he is taking his foot off the gas in terms of being a really aggressive coach, or just maybe he's picking his spots. I don't know. But yeah, that's definitely surprising.
I think Tomlin will take kind of the macho bravado route when describing why he does when he does it. I've never really bought that. Coaches are not, go with your gut all the time kinds of guys. They're very calculated. They're very strategic. I think game to game, though, is really where the decision is. It depends on the opponent. It depends on the opportunity in the game. We saw it a bunch last season. If they went down the field, they were moving the ball very well, like they were on the first drive that they scored on against Kansas City. Well, at the very least, they made a bunch of big plays, and they haven't shown yet a short yardage situation. They might come out and go for two. And that, if you spread that out over the course of the season, you have to look at it from that perspective as well. How many of those plays are you willing to draw up and willing to practice throughout the season? You're going to put a lot of stuff on tape. So you really have to come out with something that looks new, that looks fresh, depending on whichever opponent you're facing that particular week. So I think this time it hasn't fit the scenarios they were looking to accomplish in each of the games that they had played. Certainly to this point, they obviously did a lot more last year. I think they had more strategic opportunity to do that last year. I don't think they did it against Cincinnati, for example. Against Washington, if they didn't do it, I think it might have been more the personnel they had on the field at that point. When you don't have Le'Veon Bell and you have D'Angelo Williams, you're not as versatile. So if anything, maybe that's even the point. They didn't want to do it as much without Bell. They felt Bell will be the guy that's going to give them the most versatility with what they have drawn up and what they've planned heading into each game. And when you have Bell, they went out and did it in the first drive. They didn't need to do it again. I feel that more than likely they just felt they were in control. You kind of steal a possession each time you do one of those successfully. The amount of times you want to do that in a game, I think, is kind of questionable. 2-point lead doesn't really matter in comparison to a 3-point or a 1-point lead. So maybe that plays into it. I think there's a lot of math that becomes subjective to the desires of the coach. I think Tomlin kind of he keeps those decisions to himself, but I think he wants to be aggressive in the situations where he feels he has the opportunity to be aggressive.
Well, obviously, and that is another one of those macho bravado, huh? Obviously, some Tomlinisms there. Well, when you don't score a touchdown in the Philadelphia Eagles game, it's kind of hard to go for two. So you could scratch that one out. And like you had said, it really matters the time in the game, the score of the game, how it's been going, the weather, also a factor as we've had rain both games at Heinz Field this year. I know I've been sitting in it. Surprised I'm not sicker than I have been at this whole point. So Jeff, definitely agree with you. I've always been of the school of thought that I want the ball in the second half, put the D out there first for the same reason. If you get a 3 and out or even if it's just like a 6 or 7 play drive and they don't get very far, it still gives you pretty decent field position as long as they're not eating up chunks of yards and pinning you down inside your own 20. So I've always been a fan of that myself. And speaking about putting the pedal to the metal, we have a game here at Heinz Field coming up this Sunday against the New York Jets. We're going to preview here the next 4 games since we've been talking so much about the other 4 that I'd say we're batting about 50% here. So batting 500. We have the Jets coming up. We talked a little bit about patchwork offensive line. It could be Chris Hubbard. There's Marquise Pouncey is taking some snaps at right tackle, and my guess was maybe if Foster's back, Finney slides over at center or something. Any way you look at it, I think they're going to have a problem with this Jets defensive line. However, Jets pass defense has been absolutely miserable through their first 4 games, and they don't have Ben Roethlisberger. They have a gentleman known as Ryan Fitzpatrick that has, a Harvard education, but he doesn't seem to be able to utilize that when it comes to transitioning it to common sense on the football field. Just another thing I just thought of real quick, guys, and Neal, you had said putting too many things on tape. I think it was last Sunday. Now, I may be a little wrong because I had a few Yinglings, but did we not see all 3 tight ends on the field in one set? And then they spread them all out into like wide receiver positions. Like it was David Johnson, Jesse James, and Xavier Grimble, and that was just something where I saw it and I said, "Geez, what do you do with that as a defense?" So it's like you put the tight ends out wide, and then you have to have corners on them. Just another real strange thing there. I just wanted to point that out. Do you guys remember that by any chance or no? I think that was the Kansas City game just this last Sunday. Do you remember that?
I do remember that briefly. I didn't really think much of it at the time. It's probably because I figured in the past they've split out the H-back before. We've seen that. I might not have noticed that in a jumbo package. That's what they did if they had the 3 tight ends on the field. But these are the kinds of things that you can do when you have an offense that's now as experienced with the same coaching staff and the same core group of players together that the Steelers have. You can try a lot of different things, and you don't have to worry about working on it as much because you've got a lot of the basic stuff down for what the offense wants to accomplish. And memory serves me. I remember looking back probably over the last season and a half, the Steelers putting some type of unique package or unique set out onto the field, and they typically run it pretty well. It's not the same dumpster fire with screen passes that we saw certainly at the beginning of the Todd Haley era in Pittsburgh. I think they've come a long way with what they're trying to do, and they built a roster to do exactly that. You look at the kind of unique skill set of a guy like Xavier Grimble. Once Roosevelt Nix gets back on the field, you get a lot of that same thing too. These are big guys that are pretty quick in short spaces. There's a lot of things that you can do with that when you're attacking the slot on a team that, with all due respect to Eli Rogers, doesn't have like a quintessential pure slot guy right now with any real experience. There's a lot of different things that you can do with that position, and I think they're going to continue to kind of attack in a similar way when they can.
Yeah, Oh, sorry, Jeff, I'm cutting you off again. I feel like the presidential debate moderator here, where I'm not letting you talk and I'm just jumping all over the place. But you know what? Go right ahead.
CNN's crushing you right now.
And then we're off to the JETS Jets. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say it's all about versatility. The more looks you can offer to defense, you move Le'Veon Bell, D'Angelo Williams, all those tight ends you mentioned around. It just makes it that much more difficult to prepare and defend when they actually get on the field. You're going to find a mismatch somewhere. And like Neal said, that's what makes the Steelers offense really, really tough to play defense against.
Yeah, so getting back to the game coming up on Sunday, and we could be real brief with this because we've got 4 games to cover, of course, but just looking at the Jets giving up 1,100 yards passing on defense, Ryan Fitzpatrick with 10 interceptions so far this season. How you guys feel about this one? I mean, Neal, I think you had said maybe the trap game, and, I had that kind of feeling, but myself, I'm having a problem with if they just have enough time and Ben Roethlisberger gets rid of the ball quick. I don't see how their secondary could cover any of the guys on the field, let alone guys named Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell.
Watching the Jets, what it boils down to very simply is the Steelers' offensive line is probably not going to hold back that front 4, and I don't think Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to play a particularly good game. He hasn't so far this season. If anything, Jets fans could be encouraged by his, lackluster performance last week because he didn't throw 6 interceptions this time against a Chiefs team that did nothing against the Steelers offense. So Fitzpatrick looks erratic to me. He looks all over the place. We put something up on our Jets Wire site today, the timeline arc of Ryan Fitzpatrick's career. And basically it's go to one place, sit on the bench for a little bit, eventually take over in game, do really well, get the starting job for the remainder of the season, sign a contract, and then slowly decline to the point where he gets traded or released. He's at the trade or release point with the Jets, and he's playing like it too. He looked awful to me in the time that I've seen him. He's not at all in rhythm with his offense. It's an interesting game to look at. The Steelers certainly should win. I just don't trust that the healthy state of their offensive line to be able to hold back the Jets front 4 enough to just give the win to Pittsburgh. I think that's going to make them competitive.
Yeah, I think that the Steelers and Jets it's a tough one to pick. It's not as a gimme pick like Neal said. Ultimately, I think that the Jets are going to hang around, especially in the first half. It's a team that was, one win away from the playoffs last year. They still have some decent players on both sides of the football. While on defense, their front is phenomenal. Brandon Marshall can still do damage if Fitzpatrick removes his head from a certain body cavity. And ultimately, I think that the Steelers will, in the second half, kind of pull away. I think that Pittsburgh wins this game. It's at home. Roethlisberger's record at home in October is ridiculous. I think they win the game, but it might be closer than people think.
Okay, so the first of three, and by the way, I agree with all you guys. I can't pick against the Steelers. We just know how this is. I will tell you where they will have trouble, but I don't think it's going to be at Miami in the second week of this second quarter, as we'd want to call it, or week 6. They travel to face the Dolphins, a team that is basically almost a mirror image of the Cleveland Browns at this point, and somehow squeaked out a victory in overtime against them. Had me screaming at the TV because here in Northeast Ohio, not sure about you guys, but they have Browns on here, and it cut into my Steelers time in the kickoff for that game against Philadelphia. So I actually didn't get to see anything good with Philadelphia, even that beginning drive. I had to catch it on the Game Pass, and that was the only thing that was good about that game. So I was twice as mad because I had to watch the Cleveland Browns once again choke in a game. And by the way, if you have a chance, I don't know if you guys had this happen to you, but over in this area about 2 years ago, everyone was doing the knock-knock jokes. Who's there? Owen, 0-4, haha. Do that to a Browns fan, please, because you know what? They can't take it now. They can't take it. And it's just, turnabout's just fair play. But Miami, Ryan Tannehill, I don't know how that project continues to move forward. Adam Gase is trying to be a disciplinarian, and I mean, there's only so many guys that you could bench and say, hey, if you don't have your heart into this, you only have so many on the roster. They got a lot of money tied up into some of these guys too. I just don't see where this is the game really that could be the trap game, because Miami looks so bad. Everyone thinks Miami's bad, and it's usually when the Steelers go on the road to face this type of opponent that it gives them problems. Jeff, for, as Neal said, lack of airtime, let's go with you on this one to start.
A lot of the things that you just said. I mean, if you watched that Thursday night game against Cincinnati last week, which I did, unfortunately, and the uniforms, as ugly as they were better than their performance. It was unbelievable how unprepared they looked. And, Cincinnati's a good football team. They have their deficiencies like everyone else, but Miami, I mean, defensively, at some point you have to try to cover AJ Green. I mean, that's just the way that it goes. I don't understand what they were trying to do. It kind of reminded me of last year when the Oakland Raiders came to Heinz Field and they just never stopped changing the way they wanted to cover Antonio Brown, and he put up over 230 yards against him. It looked like a video game. And the Miami Dolphins are struggling, and I just don't see them being on the same field with the Steelers. But at the same time, and I hate the fact that I think this and that we have to talk about it, this has trap game written all over it. Because if you look who's after this game, as the Patriots come into town, and we're going to talk about them next, a lot of people would suggest the Steelers might overlook the Dolphins. They're on the road, and for all those reasons, they could possibly lose this game. Well, there's only one way to get rid of all that garbage, and that is to just go out and win those games. Win the game on Sunday against the Jets. Go down to Miami, take care of business. I think that the Steelers should win the game. I think that they will win the game, but obviously I've been wrong with that a lot in the past when it comes to bad teams on the road, and sometimes even at Heinz Field. So I'm going to say they win, but very hesitant with that.
Yeah, same thing here. And I'm just thinking, hey guys, you know what? Get to bed early and don't party around South Beach or whatever. And Neal, how you feel about this Miami game?
I think the Miami Dolphins are just a gong show at this point. They're a terrible football team. Watching them, honestly, I feel like I'm watching them tonight. I'm watching the 49ers Cardinals game here on Twitter, watching it stream, and these two teams are playing terribly. And unfortunately, when you watch a team on Thursday night, it seems like that happens more often than not. But Miami, top to bottom, is not a good team. I don't get any sense of what Gase is trying to do. What I do know is, within the team, he's calling a lot of guys out in the media. That's not something you do when you don't have any real credentials as a head coach, and you're not winning games either. So I don't expect them to be any better by the time they will play Pittsburgh. But the real thing here is getting to the letdown game, the mentality of that. These guys have a very set schedule. They're on call basically during the season at all times. They get Tuesdays off, but everything they're doing is very regimented, and their coaches are on top of that. There are games they don't play well. There are games that they get out coached. There are games they get outplayed because they're playing against guys that get paid to do this for a living as well. motivation comes in the form of money in the NFL. These guys will not have jobs if they continue to play poorly, so they're going to have ups and downs. Guys rise above their average ability just like they fall below it. It happens to everybody. That really is the basis of the statement any given Sunday. The Steelers are not going to overlook the Miami Dolphins because they play the Patriots the next week. That makes absolutely no sense, logically, figuratively, or anything. If they get beat by the Dolphins, they will have blown an opportunity to pick up another win in a very competitive league, no doubt. But it'll take a lot for that to happen. They really should be able to beat the Dolphins. Similarly, the way they should beat the Browns pretty much every time they play them. But here and there, that doesn't happen. 90% of the time, they'll win, but 10% of the time, a lot of weird stuff happens, and a 4-12 Browns team pulls off a win over Pittsburgh somehow. It happens, but I don't see Miami winning that game.
It's funny you mentioned that Browns game because for the listeners who may have missed one of the podcasts I think I ran like a week ago when I was talking about the Eagles' loss, it felt like that Cleveland loss about 2 years ago in 2014 where just nothing went right in the first quarter and they got beat down pretty bad on the road. Came back, they had that game with the Texans, which is very similar to this Kansas City Chiefs style blowout, all of the scoring right before halftime. And then a week later, Ben throws 6 touchdown passes against the Indianapolis Colts, and that's kind of where I felt this team might be at this same time. Following all of that, of course, I believe somewhere mixed in there was that Jets game with Michael Vick on the road, which may have the same similar feel to this whole Miami Dolphins thing. But one of the disappointments that one of my teammates here at Steel City Underground, actually, she had mentioned that one of her biggest disappointments was the fans because we were seeing some of the comments that were just getting spewed out about the Philadelphia Eagles, and you hit the nail on the head right there, Neal. There's 32 teams in the NFL, and they all get paid money to play football. They are all professionals. There's no one some do it better than others. That's why some guys make more money than others. Guys end up in the Hall of Fame. Guys have 1-year careers. Guys have 10-year careers. But when it all boils down to is these are professionals, and they're out there to probably do the best to their ability on that given date with whatever the coaches are also trying to do the best of their ability. So sometimes it's just a matter of execution. You don't execute, the other team doesn't execute, maybe both teams execute, and just one play may dictate it all. And that's what everyone has to remember out there. So even when you say something like I do hate using the word trap game, and I probably shouldn't have used it, but everybody's kind of familiar with what that is, and it's just one of those things that kind of happens. Everyone thinks they might look down an opponent. I'm sure that works into it sometimes. You're looking at records, and if you're blowing somebody out and they have 2 good games here back to back with the Chiefs and the Jets, and they put up a lot of points on the Jets, they're going to think they just go down to Miami and do the same thing. And if it's not working and they have a game, a very similar start where things kind of imploded like it did in Philadelphia, you never know. You never know. That could be one of those things. But like you said, I don't know that necessarily they look ahead to the Patriots. And, Mike Tomlin would probably be asked this before or after, and he's going to say the same thing as well, because that will be the next opponent. Tom Brady back from suspension this week because, I haven't heard enough about it. And we'll see. Maybe Gronk's healthy by that point, and who knows what the Patriots are doing, because as the Steelers are knocking down the same opponents that the Patriots are lucky enough to play twice a year, this is the third of the 4 AFC East opponents 3 weeks in a row, and actually this whole quarter all AFC opponents. So every game kind of critical when you're talking about postseason rankings. Patriots are always going to play tough with no matter what hand they're dealt, and they're never going to show you what ace they have up their sleeve. This is going to be the tough game, I think, no matter if this is played over in Foxborough or played in Pittsburgh. Luckily, we have it in our house, and hopefully the worst thing about it will be that on the replay I'll have to hear Phil Simms, because I think it's a 4:25 CBS doubleheader. So, Jeff, I'll give you another crack at this. New England Patriots. I don't know where to go with this. I really don't. I don't know who to be scared of and what to feel, because we're looking so far down the road here when it's going to be week 7. What do you think?
The first thing I think about is I look at some of the injuries the Steelers have on their team right now, entering week 5, and some of those injuries, they should be back by this game. I'm looking at a player like Ryan Shazier, Robert Golden, even though he was limited this week. The hamstring, you might want to take your time with that. They should have, obviously barring any new injuries, which certainly could happen, they should have more of a complete roster back for this game. But it's Tom Brady. It's Tom Brady. It's the New England I'm going to say the New England Belichicks. It's the New England Patriots. It's the Bill Belichick. These guys have an aura about them, and they're a very tough football team. And yeah, they play in a really bad division, but they're also really good, and they're very well coached. I, for the life of me, think it would be really tough for the Steelers to beat the Patriots twice in a season. And I don't think that that's impossible, but I think it'd be really tough. And I do think that these two teams are destined to meet again in the postseason. And the thing is where is the game being played? The only time that Ben Roethlisberger has ever beaten Tom Brady has been at Heinz Field. And so you have to hope that the Steelers might be able to claim that top seed in the playoffs if they were able to continue this winning trend that they're on and possibly have them come back to Heinz Field. Do I think they're going to win this game? If I'm a betting man, I'm going to say no, even though it is at Heinz Field. I think that they're going to drop a game here in the second quarter. It's going to be against the Patriots. The Patriots just, they seem to match up well against Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh defense, there's a team that's going to dink and dunk their way all the way down the field, but they're going to put touchdowns on the board. And defensively, I don't know. It's a tough game, like you said, Joe. It's you really don't know which direction to go with this. We haven't seen Tom Brady play yet. He could be rusty. It could take him a while to get warmed up. I don't know. But I never liked the Steelers against the Patriots for a lot of reasons, and I think that's probably why I would pick them to lose this game.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Jeff said is what I would say, but I'll add this as well. It's not anything specific against the Steelers. Tom Brady does this to every team in the NFL. I think Steelers fans tend to get a very myopic viewpoint of Tom Brady's overarching success in the league, which is historic, without question or debate. He puts up points on a lot of people. Yeah, he's given a few pretty savage beatings to the Steelers over time, but it's not as if much of that is a whole lot different than a lot of other beatings he's given other teams. The guy's really, really good. That's why the Patriots beat the Steelers a lot. They beat a lot of teams a lot. If the Steelers can't find a way to get in his face, to crowd the area at his feet, and to make him uncomfortable throwing the ball, he's probably going to have a big game. He usually has a big game because they do a pretty good job of keeping him clean. All these things are indicative of a very strong offensive football team, and that's what the Patriots have been for the last decade and change. It's not an accident they've had the success that they've had. And on top of it all, really the discipline and the disguise ability of their defense is to me what really makes the mark. While I think it's been amazing to see what Belichick has been able to transform their offense in from 2007, when they were the best offense in the history of the NFL, to now, which is something much more tight end oriented. They're vertically attacking the seams. They're attacking the flats with their receivers more than they're going down the field. It's a completely different offense. And with Belichick, his genius is having the courage and the freedom to change things up as much as they have, and just simply go after a team's weakness and put all his chips on the table and just say, look, take away this. That's fine. We're going to do this every single time, and we're going to beat you. I mean, this is a guy that literally will run the ball 40 times in week 1 and then throw it 60 times in week 2. There's not a whole lot of teams that have the ability or frankly the balls to do that, and they've had a world of success doing it. It's extremely hard to defend. It's extremely hard to prepare for. That said, I just don't see New England losing a whole lot of games, and I don't think that they will when they come to Pittsburgh either.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow. Now, Jeff, you had mentioned some injuries and maybe getting some of these guys back. One that is targeting week 7, of course, on the physically unable to perform list. We have not heard much about, except for I got like an alert or something from ESPN. It may have been from Jeremy Fowler or something like that. It was funny because I was just mentioning this earlier in the day before it came across my phone screen, and that's Ladarius Green. And a lot of people had forgotten about Ladarius Green based on the early success of the Steelers right now. Not a real liability with Jesse James or Xavier Grimble or David Johnson out there. It'll be interesting because if Green should be ready to go and gets activated here within, well, we're entering week 5, so he won't be eligible for week 6, but he could begin practicing and be activated for week 7. Could be something that the Patriots will not have on tape and be able to prepare for. So it could be an X factor. Never know. I'm not saying he's going to play one way or the other, and I'm sure, just like myself, you guys are pretty much left in the dark on this guy as well.
I forgot he was even there, to be honest with you. I really don't think it matters. He wasn't a guy that I think, figured they were going to get their best from in the first year. He's still a young player. He's still growing. For him to become a real solid 3-down tight end, which they've typically wanted to have, along with variations of the backups, the fullbacks, and the H-backs around him, he was going to need some work. And I think this year it's largely a lost cause. He's not going to be able to really have put in that work. And there's not really a whole lot of criticism you can throw at the Steelers offensively right now, outside of a few things here and there. They have to feel pretty set with what they have. If Green can come in and contribute and build himself more toward the end of the year, then great. One more weapon in the holster. But I certainly don't think week 7 they're going to be ushering to throw him a surprise party when he walks in the facility or anything.
No, not against the Patriots either.
I don't think he's much of a factor. If they can get something from him, great. But I really think the sight for him is more on next season. I hope I'm wrong about that, but let's keep in mind he's there because of his ankle. Plenty of reports have indicated that he's had an issue with concussions, and that might have been a factor to all of this. So while they can say that definitively, yes, he was put on the PUP list because of his ankle, he might have had concussion-related issues that led to a lot of this. And if that's the case, then you're not rushing to get him back on the field anyway.
Yeah, I mean, he honestly, you watch the film of what he did in San Diego in his rookie contract. He wouldn't necessarily. Could he have a spot on this team? I think he could. He's not going to be the 3-down tight end that Neal talked about, but he could bring a new wrinkle, a new dynamic to the Steelers offense that honestly they haven't had. I mean, I am really trying to think of an athletic tight end that has speed, that can stretch the field, and I'm struggling. I've had Eric Green back in the 90s. I mean, that might be the first name that comes up. They just haven't had it. I mean, they've always had the Heath Miller types, Jay Bruner, Jeremy Tooman, all those players that are very traditional. Matt Spaeth is another one. I think that he could be someone that if they can get a couple plays out of him, put him in the slot, move him around a little bit. That's kind of where the NFL is going with the tight end position anyways. Look at what the Seahawks do with Jimmy Graham and Rob Gronkowski and all these other players that are doing well at the tight end position. I think that he could give something to this team, but it might not be what everyone expected when he was the big free agent signing of the offseason.
Yeah.
He was a big free agent signing, but he wasn't a league-wide big free agent signing. He didn't get big money or anything like that. But I think that's a great point, actually. Use him for the slot. I get why fans like Eli Rogers. I was a big fan of Eli Rogers myself. Eli Rogers is not a great horizontally gifted athlete. He does not move side to side particularly well. He'll get open in the slot. He's going to make 0 plays after the catch in the slot. And maybe that has something to do with the fact that the dude's tiny, but really he's not avoiding guys in the open field. I think Green has, he's got some shakes. He's a big body. He's not going to be necessarily easy just to come in and take down. He might be able to shake something loose. So yeah, I think maybe that's a good option. I think Jeff makes a good point. Use him for situations in that slot role and see what you can get from it. But he's not going to be in line 3 downs a game. Or 3 downs a possession. I don't think that you can just take Jesse James off the field at this point.
You took the words right out of my mouth there, especially with the slot receiver type deal. And it seems like the Steelers have been struggling to get somebody to just stay in that slot position for several years now. They had to experiment with Lance Moore, and when he was hurt, Justin Brown was in there at one point, and none of those guys really worked out. I know they've tried to have Wheaton play in that spot at points too. And of course now Eli Rogers. Well, the good news is, and I don't remember the exact specific number, I think it was 63% of the snaps that Ladarius Green had played in San Diego last season was out of the slot position. So, and not by any mistake or coincidence, the reason I brought up that play with all of the tight ends on the field earlier was you could have a scenario where maybe you do have Xavier Grimble, Jesse James, and Ladarius Green all on the field, and you start motioning some of these guys out. You have one guy kick out wide, and what do you do? What do you do in that circumstance? So it seems like more of like a gadget thing, but hey, you know what? You never know. A 2-point conversion or a 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 scenario. We've seen stranger things. So the Steelers, though, if Green, no relation to Eric Green, by the way, who you mentioned, Jeff, if Ladarius Green does come back, if he does play against, or if he's activated for Week 7 against the Patriots, probably very limited time, if any. The Steelers will have a bye week following that game where they'll maybe get some more practice time in there. And I do believe they have 21 days to activate him anyways, so there's no guarantee that he would even be activated for Week 7. That's just the earliest that he could be on the active roster and play in a game. So they could go into the bye week, and then, of course, another game that always seems to be a problem for the Steelers is traveling to the Baltimore Ravens, although the Ravens have pretty much owned us in our own house over the last several seasons. No matter who they seem to put on the field, I can't figure this team out for the life of me. 3-1, even going 3-0. Their opponents very weak to start the season. Raiders, a very well-deserved win last week, coming back. So I don't know what to think of Baltimore, and looking ahead probably about 4 to 5 weeks from now, I'm not sure what Baltimore is going to be at that point either. I just know it's an AFC North battle. It's definitely the Pittsburgh Steelers' true rival and not the Cincinnati Bengals. And you know what? As much as we say that and I make that comment, and the Steelers owning the Bengals, the Ravens have owned us. Jeff, want to close it out with the Ravens?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the few teams, other than maybe Cincinnati, in the second matchup when Vontaze Burfict will be back, that the Steelers really have an axe to grind with this team. Last year, the Ravens had a horrible year. Everyone knows the injuries they sustained, and all the players they had to put on injured reserve. At the same time, this is a team that they talk about rivalries and all that stuff. Ultimately, I think that it comes down to just you need to win the football games. And if they look at anything, they should look back at 2015. They got beat twice, and the way that they lost at home, it just still boggles my mind, with Scobie missing the field goals, with Antonio Brown dropping the touchdown pass. It just was a really weird game. And then obviously Ryan Mallett in Baltimore, it just didn't add up. It doesn't make sense. I think that this team, the Steelers team, is really going to be looking for this game. And historically, Mike Tomlin's very good coming off the bye. I think that they absolutely will be more than ready for the Ravens. I think that they win this game. And I wouldn't be surprised if they actually win it handily. I unfortunately live in Maryland and have to watch a lot of the Baltimore Ravens games and have to be around these moron fans all the time. And ultimately, I think that the Steelers, like I said, they're going to be looking at this game. They might have that circled on their calendar, so to speak. I think the Steelers win and finish the second quarter 3-1, just like they did the first one.
The Steelers have lost 3 straight to the Ravens. You have to go all the way back to the primetime game where Ben threw 6 touchdown passes, the 43-23 game. Jeff, I think you and I did a podcast after that game. That's how long ago that was. They have not played well against the Ravens in 3 straight games. You have to credit a Ravens team that's been able to shut them down in that time. But the one simple fact is the Steelers have been without either Ben Roethlisberger or Le'Veon Bell in every one of those games. You can't tell me the Steelers team is not grossly affected if those 2 players are not on the field. In fact, the playoff game, if you ever look back at this, and I think we might have talked about this before, but the list of guys who got carries in the playoff game after the 2014 season is laughable. I mean, none of them entered the league again, I think, after that, except for Dree Archer, and he never carried the ball again. So you were looking at a running back stable that had all of them had their last NFL carries in that game. Last year, the games against them, D'Angelo Williams got hurt halfway through. Bell was out in the second game. The first game, you're without Ben Roethlisberger, facing the nightmare scenario of having to play a Thursday night game coming off of a road game in which he lost Ben Roethlisberger. Odds really weren't in their favor, and then it still took a kicker missing twice in the fourth quarter to lose that game. Plus, I think 2 possessions in overtime with an offense that literally ran out of plays at one point. It was obvious in the fourth quarter. They were just hoping to get enough of a lead by then that they could just run basic stuff and not have to compete in the game. Vic didn't know enough. He didn't know enough about what he was doing. You almost can't blame him for it. That said, this Baltimore team is not nearly as good as their 3-1 record suggests that it is. You look at advanced analytics, Football Outsiders in particular, they've got a pretty decent defense. Their offense is really not very good. Pittsburgh should win this game, and I've said that the last 2 regular season games they played them. I picked the Ravens to win the playoff game, but Pittsburgh's a better team. Baltimore has another year yet, I think, to grow back into a contender, and they're going on a good path. I think it's a great start for them. You can't control who you schedule. It says you have to play. You just have to go out and beat them, and they've done that. So I think there's certainly enough there to think that they can win, but Pittsburgh's a better team. They really should win that game.
Yeah, speaking of the next 4 opponents for the Baltimore Ravens, which may paint a clearer picture heading into that game after the bye, they get to play the Washington Redskins coming up here this Sunday. They follow that up with 2 games at MetLife Stadium. Actually, they play both back-to-back, the New York Giants and then the New York Jets. So 2 of the Steelers' opponents, you'll be able to kind of put the yardstick up and measure maybe where the Ravens are at that point. But by any means, we've seen how those teams have imploded against Pittsburgh. Well, we haven't seen it yet with the Jets, but we've seen the Jets implode against other opponents thus far. And I'm not entirely sold on what the Giants are yet this year either. So it is a very good possibility that the Ravens enter this game after the bye with a above 500 record, and this could be for the lead in the AFC North division. And just to back up what you said there, Neal, I pulled up the statistics from that playoff game. Of course, Bennett attempted 45 passes in the game. He got picked twice. If we recall, Ben Tate was signed that week, and I think there was not just 1 but 2 critical errors that occurred. One was, I think, was a fumble with Terrell Suggs, and then there was another play where he'd missed the block, and that's how Ben ended up throwing the pick. Just going off my memory, I could be totally wrong about that and just lying, and the Baltimore Ravens were just a better team that day. But Josh Harris, Ben Tate, Will Johnson got 1 carry in that. Martavis Bryant got a carry. And then also getting a carry was Dree Archer for a -1 yard. So Josh Harris, 9 for 25, Ben Tate, 5 for 19, and those guys basically disappeared off the face of the planet following that loss. So,
all right, so Brian Johnson really screwed up my golden stat. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Well,
Johnson, I remember that Archer carry. I remember throwing something at the TV. It was absolutely pathetic. Terrell Suggs had him kind of at an angle, and classic Dree Archer. He won't go forward. He has to try to outflank the 275-pound Terrell Suggs. So he takes a step kind of the side and has to step back, and Suggs just kind of swats at his leg and he falls over. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. There's one guy there. You need to get up the field. Archer couldn't run the ball to save his life. He was an absolute disaster.
Don't break any of your equipment over there right now. It's over, man. Let it go.
Terrible.
So Neal has 3-1. I think at the very worst it could be 2-2, but I'm also going 3-1. I'm sorry. Did I say Neal? I meant Jeff had 3-1. I'm going to say 3-1. And Neal, I didn't get yours, but I'm assuming 3-1. We're thinking the Patriots is the biggest hurdle here. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think they'll lose that one, but I think they'll win the other ones.
Okay, and as I said off the air for you guys, I had a super surprise bonus question. It's not even so much a surprise as much it's a comment. During the offseason, heading into this game, and I mentioned this on the Jets preview podcast that's already out as well, but I wanted your opinions on it. Brandon Marshall was willing to bet Antonio Brown a car. You think he's still feeling good about that?
I don't know if he was ever entirely serious.
Well, I mean, you got to think about it too. I'll never forget. He was watching a video on NFL.com as Ike Taylor goes back. He was during minicamp, and he's walking through the parking lot, and he sees Antonio Brown's Rolls Royce sitting there. And he goes, look, this thing is dirty. It means he drives it. It's a Rolls Royce. Like, if you're driving your Rolls Royce, that means that you don't need that car anymore. It's a Rolls Royce. And that's one of the few vehicles that if you're going to put a Porsche up against it, I mean, Antonio Brown's probably like, yeah, I guess I could donate that car if I had to, but he's not going to lose the bet even if they were a real bet.
I think that was Antonio Brown's comment, in fact. I think basically it's like, all right, well, you're going to need to pony up something on top of your Porsche for this.
Yeah, that was my first thought anyway.
That's like me putting up my 04 Honda Civic and saying, yeah, let's do this. Like, who cares? No one wants that car. I mean, it's the Honda
traffic battle right now.
We'll race for pinks, as they said in Fast and the Furious.
Yeah, I mean, Marshall has gotten off to a slow start. He's been banged up as well. Fitzpatrick has been playing absolutely miserable, and just even putting together the timeline of the last 4 or 5 years of Fitzpatrick's stats up against Ben's, and just the volume of which he throws versus Ben, and the same thing with the targets and receptions of Antonio Brown versus Marshall. I don't think Marshall has caught more balls, been targeted more, or had more yards receiving than AB has over the last 3 years. So hypothetically, if this bet was accepted, Marshall might be kicking himself right now, and I'm wondering what it's going to look like after Sunday. So, gentlemen, it's always a pleasure having you on. This was possibly the longest Steel City Underground podcast to date, but definitely worth it. And Neal, if you'd like to give some parting thoughts first, because I know that you always have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I think you have to like what you see so far, and there is something to be said about the fact that you're still buzzing a little bit after a 43-14 win, along with the home game against a beatable team the coming week. You're going to feel pretty confident, but this will again be an up and down road. These injuries are not anything to ignore. I think it's significant that both Gilbert and Harris are looking like they're not going to play. Gilbert not for sure, or Gilbert is out for sure. I think Harris is still slightly on the bubble, but either way, the hits they're taking on the offensive line, that creates a massive hole within your offense, and that makes the Steelers a very beatable team. So we could have a much different conversation the next week, but really this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. 10-6, 11-5 is a perfectly acceptable record. Recently, home field has not been a huge advantage, so I think this team is capable of making noise deep late in the season. They're going to lose a game or two that they probably should otherwise win. So it's not over yet. Let's just see who the healthiest team is come December.
And Jeff, parting thoughts.
I think if you look back at the 2015 season, history can tell you something about this team. Number one, they're very resilient. You saw that in Kansas City with players like Vince Williams, Jordan Dangerfield, BJ Finney stepping up. I fully expect that trend to continue. But if anything, you noticed that in 2015, the defense especially improved tremendously as the season went on, as players got more comfortable, as they got more familiar with each other, the scheme and what Keith Butler wanted to do. The team started to perform better defensively, almost to the point where in the playoffs, the defense was one of the strengths of the team. I think you should expect to see something similar. Are there deficiencies? Yes. Will there always be deficiencies? Absolutely. But at the same time, I look at this team, especially the team's defense, and say they're going to get better. It's like Neal said, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I think that by the end of the season, when the Steelers are looking at the postseason, their defense could be pretty it could be very different, and it could be very good.
Yeah, and I have to agree. And even going back to where are we going to go? The 2014 season, this team got better as the season went on. They win the AFC North. Going back to 2013, where they started 0-4 with the knock-knock joke, of course. They end up finishing 8-8 and nearly backdoored their way into the playoffs. If it wasn't for even Andy Reid sitting all of his players, still nearly beat that San Diego Chargers team. And if it wasn't for not only a missed field goal, but a blown call by the officials in that game with overtime, the Steelers would have made the playoffs that season as well. So resiliency is definitely there. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Neal Coolong, Senior senior editor, Steelers Wire, and all USA Today said Wire properties, and Jeff Hartman from Behind the Steel Curtain. Thank you guys for joining me. My name is Joe Kuzma. I am the founder and head writer over at Steel City Underground, of course. Until next time, be safe, be good, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.